Welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Josh Berger.
And I'm Brian Lomax. And today, Josh and I are going to speak with Chris Harwood. If you're a regular listener to the Tennis IQ podcast, you may recall that we did a 3-part series on parenting in tennis. A lot of that was based on the work that Chris Harwood has done, along with Sam Thrower. And in communicating with Chris about those episodes, he had mentioned that he'd been working on what he calls his 5 C's framework, which has been around for a while, but he'd been working on it more in tennis. And so we wanted to get him back and to talk about that a little bit more. So let's first talk about who Chris Harwood is. So Chris is a professor of sports psychology at Nottingham Trent University and an honorary professor of Loughborough University in the UK. He's currently the director of the Sport, Health, and Performance Enhancement Research Center at Nottingham Trent, where his research interests lie in the integration of psychological principles into youth sports settings and the roles of the coach, parents, and the wider organizational support system. Now, prior to his training and registration as a sports psychologist, Chris was head coach and then director of tennis at Loughborough in the 1990s and has worked as a lead psychologist in professional football and lead psychologist for the Lawn Tennis Association in the UK. Chris has been a long-standing member of the WTA Tour Player Development Advisory Panel and supports junior and pro players, their families, and support teams in his private practice. He still enjoys competing as a Masters tennis player for his county team in the UK. So Chris developed the 5 C's framework as a user-friendly method of integrating key concepts of psychology into player development programs and environments. The 5 C's are commitment, communication, concentration, control, and confidence. So in our conversation today, we'll be discussing the 5 C's, how they're relevant to everyone involved in tennis, but especially coaches and parents. So we hope that you enjoy our conversation with Chris Harwood. Well, we are very excited to have Chris Harwood on the podcast today to talk about the 5 C's framework, how that applies to tennis, how that can help not only players, but parents and coaches and, the whole unit around a player. And before we get into the whole 5 C's framework, I think our audience would love to hear about your tennis journey, Chris, because you are a competitive player. I think still playing maybe some high-level doubles, but I think it would be really germane for you to just tell us a little bit about your story in tennis, how that then transferred to sports psychology.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Brian, and Josh as well. Thanks for having me on the show. Well, yeah, I guess I started out as like a typical kind of multi-sport playing kid. I played a bit of golf, swimming, cricket, but tennis was something I took to. I was a little bit later in my junior life, probably more like 10 or 11 years of age when I really started playing a little bit more, and I guess not seriously, but trying to hone the strokes and take that up as a predominant sport. And I guess maybe 14 years of age, I was playing, good county tennis or state level tennis, as you might refer to it in the US. And really that took me to university. So I went to Loughborough University, which is a major sports university in the UK, probably one of the world leading sport universities for sports science, and did my degree in sports science and physical education, primarily also to develop my tennis skills as well. And I think I really, I guess, took on as a player from 18 years old onwards, because obviously you get surrounded by other athletes who are training at a high level, and that had a positive kind of modeling effect on me, where you can take your own tennis game to a higher level as a result of the athletes around you in different sports. So definitely started playing a few more kind of lower level, I guess, semi-pro events in the UK. Played County Week, which is our predominant group state versus state kind of competition in the UK for the next sort of 15, 16 years for Leicestershire. And had some really good years playing against some of the top British players in Group One and Group Two of County Week, which is like the upper end of our sort of group tournament structure. I managed to win the British Universities Championships in 1996, which is kind of the equivalent to the NCAA's, but obviously on a much smaller scale. And at that time, I was head coach of the university. So I finished my sports science degree off, and then my master's degree off in sports science in 1993. And I was appointed or won a PhD scholarship in 1993 for 3 years to study sports psychology, but at the same time work as the head coach of the men's and women's tennis teams at the university, which I continued to do actually until my kind of appointment as a lecturer or assistant professor in sports psychology in kind of 1998. So still, played tennis as a coach, competitively through that time. Definitely found that your late 20s were the best years in terms of, prime time kind of, competitive level. But continued on obviously into my 30s, played veterans tennis over 35s, into masters, and still play in the over 50s for the county and club, going into Europe now and again, representing the UK in our club championships as well. So yeah, more doubles now. I think, I think those guys who are over 50s now recognize that if you had, 2 or 3 hard doubles matches in one day, the next day you feel like your skeleton's been in the tumble dryer. Yeah, but still enjoy competing.
Yeah. I mean, I can, the idea of playing one event in a tournament resonates. I typically play more singles, but I get lots of offers to play doubles. I'm like, nope, I'm a one event guy. That is it. So that's it. Thank you for that history and that origin story there. So talk to us now a little bit about how you transitioned into sports psychology, and then it seems based on the years that you just gave there that your work, to develop the 5 C's framework came fairly quickly thereafter.
Yeah, I think the starting point, I think for listeners, is the fact that in my master's degree and then PhD, I actually focused on achievement goal theory. So most coaches and most coaches actually probably would recognize that in terms of the dichotomy between performance, process, and outcome goals, essentially. So and I took a real interest in that from a scientific, point of view as a student and a player and a coach, because my PhD was focused on how children define success and failure in their sport through means of whether they adopt mastery-oriented task involving goals, which are focused on progress, improvement, effort, which most of you now will familiarize with a growth mindset, which is from Carol Dweck's work, or obviously much more win-oriented, more ego-involving goals. And so the whole PhD was really focused in tennis, a little bit in swimming, but also mainly in tennis, on looking at the sources by which children developed those goals or created those goals. And of course, it's not surprising that the scoring system of the sport, the focus on rankings, results, ratings, the pressure from coaches or governing body systems and parents, and the culture around tennis itself were the kind of sources or influencing ego involvement in kids, which then, of course, manifested in things like anxiety and anger responses on court, etc. The typical struggles emotionally that we see in young players primary school and young players going through adolescence. There, And I developed an intervention program based around that, which was a final study of my PhD, which was actually a program working with coaches, with players, and with parents together around trying to help them to be more process and progress oriented, on court in training, when approaching matches, when supporting their child in the car, and post match, kind of as well. So very much more process oriented way of working with players. And that had some really interesting and great results for the 4 families I worked with in that study. I still use that stuff like that, and that's like 30 years ago. So that kind of approach, that theory, it doesn't age in tennis. It doesn't age in sports, and it definitely doesn't age in tennis. So I'm a big believer in that particular theory. And when I started work at Loughborough University in 1998, I did 3 more years kind of writing those papers up. But the origin story of the 5 C's really came when I took some time away from academia full time and was approached to work as the club psychologist for Nottingham Forest Football Club, which was a real departure for me, obviously, as an individual sport guy and coach. But I'd done a couple of seasons by then, ironically, working with our university women's hockey team as their psychology practitioner. So I'd done a lot of teamwork related consultancy. And I just fancied a bit of a career change for a bit. I didn't lose my contract at university because I maintained like a 0.3 position for 2 years. But I decided to go out there and try a new sport. And that's really where the 5 C's framework came in, because I'd worked with the first team of the adult players in the championship at that stage, and then started working with the academy kids and the academy parents and coaches. And I think that's where I began to notice the fact that psychology was viewed as, of course, massively important, but not really part of the strategy in terms of coaching and developing young players, young footballers at that time. The focus would be on, passing, heading, shooting, playing out from the back, tactical development. But psychology was all over the place, yet vitally important. And so I think what I tried to take as a consultant and practitioner in football was a way of bringing across psychology into the building, into the environment, and helping the coaches appreciate the hooks that they could use to integrate sports psychology principles onto the pitch and into player development. And that's really where the 5 C's framework started, because it was the best way, the most user-friendly way of bringing those concepts to life in that environment.
So can you tell us just a little bit about, when you're in that, very elite soccer or football environment, what the response was, from some of these players, the players within the academy, and just, how they responded to, that framework and that 5C program that you have.
And before you answer, Chris, we might even want to reveal what the 5 C's are so that it doesn't remain such a mystery.
Yeah, so the 5 C's are commitment, communication, concentration, control, and confidence. In answer to your question, Josh, the work started through the coaches. So I didn't start with the players. It was it was a process by which I worked with the coaches on helping them to understand kind of the key pillars that the key pillars of psychology that affect players, their players. And to me, and this is where the five C's really stem from, is that the demands of football, but equally the demands of tennis and the demands of most sports, they will impose demands which challenge the player from a motivational point of view. They will challenge the player from an attentional point of view. They will challenge the player from an emotional point of view, and they will challenge the player from an interpersonal point of view in terms of their interactions and communication and interactions or relationships with other people around them. There, four key pillars essentially where sport can place a demand upon someone else and cause responses to happen. Sometimes often negative responses in those areas, giving up on the pitch, being distracted externally, time traveling ahead, excessive anger or anxiety, poor interpersonal skills and conflict, for example. And when you add a fifth C, confidence, if you look, take the five C's, those four C's represent the pillars, and confidence to a degree emerges as the outcome of those four areas. It's a C, and I think we view it as a separate construct in itself, in the sense of the importance of showing confident behavior, what behavior looks like when you're confident, as well as recognizing that those strategies and behaviors which you use and try to execute in terms of commitment or motivation and communication and control ultimately lead to an individual who has greater levels of self-belief, as a person in that moment. So the five C's came about really by helping coaches using examples on the pitch that we had on video, and also talking through the language they used, because they will use psychological terms all the time in their on-pitch communications. And we did like a list of the terms that they used. And then we basically segmented them to the C's and saying, well, when you talk about someone having a spring in their step, for example, which is a typical term, well, it's an indicator of confident behavior. When we talk about a person who's gone missing, for example, who's avoiding the ball, we talk about low commitment, for example. So there's all sorts of different ways where we're able to illustrate to a coach the behaviors which link to each of the C's, there. And the coaches really took to that type of way of showing how concepts fell out in the language they used, in the behaviors that they saw in their players, and saw the opportunity of basically working with me on, okay, well, what does good look like? What if we look at what good communication is for under 11s? What do we expect? Not what the outliers are, not what the world's best under 11s are communicating are, but what do we expect of that developmental stage in terms of a communication? And similarly with control or concentration. And so the five C's program in football bore out of coach education, working with those coaches one C at a time over the course of a season, going out and trying it on pitch with the players, using particular tools I gave them, and then coming back and going again with the next C and the next C and the next C. And we gradually brought the players and the parents in to that framework when we were ready, towards the end of that season and beyond, so we could be more aligned as a triad, essentially.
Well, that's really good. And so, as you did that work, Chris, at Nottingham Forest, what were some of the outcomes? Maybe also what were some of, I think you had referred to in the study a little bit about sort of coach competence to actually teach this, or comfort with that?
Yeah.
Was there a process in educating coaches a little bit more, or was that an evolution of the initial work?
Yeah. So the focus of the study was actually, you're right, on building what we called it psychological coaching efficacy. So it's the confidence a coach has on integrating psychology into their coaching practice. You know, and it was actually based upon a paper that I picked up from obviously a very good colleague and old friend of mine, Dan Gould, who some of you might be aware of, who's big into tennis in the USTA. And Dan published a paper in 1999 looking at how coaches were struggling with integrating mental skills into their coaching practice, um, because they didn't have much confidence about doing it. Um, and so for me, it was about putting a program on where could I assess them by the end of it. They were more confident of saying, well, I can put a session on here and feel like the players are getting a psychological return on their investment in the session. And by the end of the intervention, um, probably across the five coaches to differing levels, all the coaches improving their coaching efficacy across each of the C's. We actually found the communication C, as a really impactful one, which we've talked about having crossover effects with the other C's, because when a coach started to introduce communication into their coaching sessions by saying, okay, let's talk about communication and what does good look like, and getting players to talk about that back to the coach. And then the coach saying, well, give us some good examples of players who you think are good communicators. And then, okay, guys, let's try and play a game now, silent soccer. So no one can talk. You can only use non-verbal communication, but one person can talk and two people can talk. And then, okay, well, let's work on praising each other when we see something good happening from a teammate. When the coach started working on introducing communication behavior into their coaching sessions, lo and behold, they didn't just become more confident at feeling like they were helping the kids with their communication, but they actually felt more confident in seeing kids improving their concentration and their motivation and their confidence. And we found that in their perceptions of their players as well, that they saw improvements in the other C's, even though they're only working as a coach on one C, which was the communication. So the communication, the ability to help kids with their interpersonal skills, particularly in a group environment with peers, seems to raise the energy and the intensity of motivation, concentration, self-control, confidence, alongside, obviously, communicating in and of itself.
I think actually speaking out loud is an underrated action. And I think we should look at it that way. Something we've talked about on our podcast is this idea of using a coach's voice to talk to yourself, but saying it out loud between points far more effective than just saying it in your mind. And it's almost like a further commitment to what you're doing. So I think, although communication in soccer or football there are different dimensions of that than there are in tennis, and I want to hear more about that. But I think just the praising of others, but just even speaking out loud to yourself, an intrapersonal type of communication.
Interpersonal, yeah. But when that kind of think aloud, well, we would call that like a think aloud protocol, that your inner dialogue is outer dialogue. We actually use that as a control practice, because we would house that as self-talk within as a strategy which helps emotional control and indeed concentration as well. So that is a predominant 5C practice, that although it's housed within control and concentration, because of its intrapersonal nature, um, the communication C always rests as an interpersonal behavior. It's like, Brian to Josh, Brian the player, Josh the coach, or the parent, or the opponent. How you manage your match court with your opponent, your line calling, your score calling. It's an interpersonal skill because it involves somebody else, there.
Could you talk? I know, I think it's really helpful for the listeners to, understand what the five C's are and where they came from, in terms of the history with football. Could you talk a little bit about some of those practices that, again, started, in the with Nottingham Forest? Could you talk a little bit about some of those specific practices that were used, in football? Like, I know we talked about self-talk as one example, and the think aloud protocol. But could you just talk a little bit about, what some of those look like within football, and then also how, those transition to tennis, or how they can be applied to tennis?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, when we talk about the sort of the motivational C, the commitment C, it in football, and it depends upon the age group you're working with, but um, the focus would be on ensuring that the kind of coach creates almost like a personal best or improvement kind of goal within a session. So it might be, for example, for players. Well, one of the examples you used to do was to first of all to decide what pitch you want to play on. We've got four football pitches of different types of effort. We've got the lowest league level football pitch. We've got championship level football pitch. We've got Premier League football pitch. All about the effort that you're going to put in today as a group. Which one do you want? Which one do you want to play on? Oh, we want to play on. We want to play on the Champions League football pitch. Okay, well, the demands that are going to go with that. It's like high level. Well, you ready for that? Are you ready? We're ready. We're ready. So with like a group of 9-year-olds, you can imagine how just offering the stimulus of what type of football pitch is going to be today gets the effort up. And you can use a practice like that to actually reinforce concentration as well. Some of the coaches would say, right, guys, drinks break, but now we've got 5 minutes of the session left. What score do you think our concentration is right now in terms of our attention and our energy on the drills we've been working on today? And we would sometimes give roles to little kids to monitor and give feedback on what they felt the score was for the group. Oh, well, I think we're at I think we've dropped our effort a little bit in the last session. I think it may be championship level of concentration because, I think we sometimes got a bit distracted by our parents over here. So there'll be a conversation. Okay, well, we've got 5 minutes left. Do you think you can take your effort levels from, say, a 7 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10? Is that kind of possible in terms of your concentration? Yes, we can do that. So, you're using a little bit of scaling activity where you're elevating concentration by making it quite time bound and realistic for them. That, yeah, we can definitely make the most out of the next 5 minutes. And so we sometimes just take that to tennis as well. It's easily transferable to tennis with young players around trying to use time and segmenting time to focus in on a particular concentration cue or a particular amount of work, which is the same thing like going to changeovers and saying, okay, well, what's our focus for the next two games or the next 5 minutes? Sometimes when you're closing out a match, it becomes focus. You time travel ahead, obviously, to the result of the match and worry about if you're not going to close out. Whereas actually, if you said to yourself, well, okay, in terms of my processes and behaviors, can I go through these things for 3 minutes? Is that possible for 3 to 5 minutes? Well, yes, it is. So you're taking your focus away to a time goal rather than an outcome goal at that time. So it's little things like that which which coaches can introduce into their natural ways of managing the attention of children in sessions. But the one thing that I think it's important to sort of stress now is that we had an acronym which we developed, which guided coaches to integrate the C's into their coaching sessions, which was called the PROGRESS acronym. And PROGRESS were 8 words which basically helped them to structure the coaching session from start to finish. And that was promote the C at the start of the session, so they could talk about it with the players and introduce the concept. Role model, which was being a role model or asking for role models of players who demonstrated those behaviours. Ownership of their learning, which was once the players have talked about it, we give the chance for players to set little goals for themselves. So is there anything they want to work on with respect to a particular, behavior? So it might be, for example, that that certain players in tennis are, let's say, working on making sure that they, commit through the backhand more and take the opportunity to get in behind the first short ball or something that's a more assertive kind of play. Well, that becomes their goal in relation to, for example, a confidence C, because the confidence C is focused on trying to make the brave decision or make a decision based upon stretching themselves to a higher level. So and the player can decide, well, yeah, okay, that's what I want to focus on today. So the coach is encouraging the child to take ownership of a psychological behavior, not just a tactical behavior in a session. We had grow the C, the G, which is drills which would help them to capture that C. So in football, the example would be if we're trying to grow emotional control, it would be playing a small-sided game and then reversing the score line with 5 minutes to go. So you're creating adversity for the kids. And it would be in that game, it would be providing with a routine to try to respond positively. So if a child makes a mistake, then actually the key response is self-talk, for example. And one coach used to develop a thumbs up, I'm back technique, which was made a mistake or lost the ball. It's like a thumbs up, I'm back, to show they're back and reset into the game, whilst playing that game with the constraints of knowing that any minute now the score could be reversed. And you could do that. Applies to tennis because the coaches who worked on this in tennis, the county coaches I worked with, will do that by adding the scenarios in, like poor line calling a coach, or reversing the score line again, or saying one serve onlys, or the next point's worth 3. So you're adding condition games into play, which are, of course, stressing particular responses in a child, but at the same time making sure they have the routines to manage those responses at the same time as well. So I think that's the type of ways they were integrating through their own coaching practice into those sessions. And importantly, after the grow, we had the reinforcement piece. So the reinforcing, the empowering peer support, and the supporter elements of progress were the ways in which they used the kids in the session. So making sure as a coach that you praised a child when they demonstrated that behavior, very important. Empowering kids to support and praise their teammates when they saw a good response. and then praising the kid who praises the kid. You know, well done, Josh. That was great feedback to Brian. You know, well done. Um, and the final S was self-review, which was end of the session, getting together, reflecting on what had been learned, what kids had picked up. And that was the top and the tail of a good psychological coaching session there. You know, not easy for coaches to pull that together, but one which some coaches did a really great job of planning their session, you know, like in that way.
I mean, I think anytime you give people a framework to design a session, or even if you're a player, having some sort of framework to, you know, if you're going out to practice on your own or with a friend, I mean, it's just so much more helpful than showing up on the court with a blank slate and winging it. Right. And so I think this is great. I mean, I think even as a, you know, mental performance coach, you could develop a session just around that framework right there. Right. And even in having a conversation, how that goes. So I think that's fantastic. You know, more recently, I think you've been translating the 5C framework into tennis. You know, we obviously did a 3-part series on some work that you and Sam Thrower had done with parents in the UK. And now, you know, when we were communicating about that, you mentioned, hey, I'm working on this 5C thing that I'm going to be rolling out to parents in the UK and families. And so we'd love to hear a little bit more about that, and, you know, where that program is, what you're seeing in terms of benefits for the family unit, you know, for the players, the coaches, because I think there's a lot of interesting things there. I probably mentioned that I'm the chair of the USTA New England Sportsmanship Good Sport Committee, you know, and so a lot of this makes a lot of sense to me. I know part of the literature around the 5Cs when you promote it to parents is this idea of building life skills, to me, which is almost like developing strong character, which is not only important in life, but it's really important in tennis. To be a great competitor, I think one must have strong character. So could you tell us a little bit about how that's going, and, you know, and where that work is?
Yeah. So I think if I just roll it back to the you know, the aims in the football where it all began, that the obviously the aim was about helping coaches with their confidence to put psychology on the map in the club, and it was also about helping players to then be more robust and develop their character around the 5Cs that we were working on with them. But as you said, it was also about trying to help their life skills through football, or their psychological and what we call psychosocial skills through football. And the reason why that was so important, Brian, was because of the release processes that happen in football, the deselection um, sort of period for kids, and I felt that, I really felt that, you know, massively, because, you know, you've got children who've invested in the best part of 10 years of their life, and then suddenly, you know, gone in terms of the dream with respect to that particular club, or moving on, you know, into professional football, and you know, that's pretty tough for these kids from an identity point of view, from a mental health point of view. There's lots of literature on that. We know that we need to do a really better job as talent development environments in making sure that we're not just developing the commercial asset here. We're developing a person who might be a professional, and they might certainly be an asset to that organization, but more importantly, they're a human and they're a child. And we need to take better responsibility holistically if they are committing that much of their identity athletically to one individual, to one sport alone. So it's a big thing of mine, around trying to ensure that we take holistic opportunities as often as we can. And so you know, the way in which we can build these people robustly with examples where they can draw on their strengths around the five C's. They might well, not everyone's going to be strong, perhaps day to day in all of the five C's in terms of behaviors, but there'll be strengths somewhere, and you can draw those strengths out, whether it be the way they talk and communicate their perseverance and effort. Even if they're not always focused or not always able to manage their emotions, there's always something positive to find if you can give children the chance to show behaviors, like that. So I think that in tennis, I took the same approach really, by saying, well, because I think in the UK, obviously, where I'm most familiar, again, the investment that parents put into tennis is massive, and kids too, particularly upper levels of the talent development pathway. When your kids get into 11, 12, 13 years of age at a high level, it's a lifestyle choice, isn't it, for families? And to me, it was a case of saying to parents in particular, look, we've got to have developmentally realistic expectations here, of for your child, and your child might become an excellent tennis player, but there's opportunities every time they step onto court, every time they play a match, every time they shake the hand of a tournament referee when they go to a new tournament. There's an opportunity to have an experience which builds their character. And so the process for me, in taking it forward into tennis, has actually largely been through the parents. We, as you're aware, with the series you did, on the papers with Sam, we took the competition parenting workshop, from the PhD to the LTA, and in essence, we've presented the competition parenting workshop to around 3,500 parents in British tennis, and that workshop, it was kind of based upon the pre-match, in-match, post-match, kind of processes, and was very achievement goal theory, very much process performance improvement focused. The next level up, which I offered, and I've ran probably workshops for about maybe 20 workshops, with the LTA over time in the counties, to about 400 parents, has been around the five C's. So it's been take the next level up of education as a parent, because you've got the basics, but let's now look at the ramping it up to psychosocial development. And so they get a little pre booklet to read about the ways in which tennis can develop life skills and other experiences that your child can have. And then we deliver a 2-hour workshop, webinar actually now, obviously online, mainly to parents, where we recover we review the psychological demands of tennis, and then the ways in which psychological and social skills play a role in meeting those demands, and then get the parents to talk about the five C's and the behaviors, so them to come up with the answers, and the ways in which they can support their child, before a match, using pre-match goal setting, or post-match conversations, the way they can talk to their children using that kind of five C's language. Very much more process focused understanding, and then taking that to the coaches a little bit more. I've done some coach education work in my state here, and the LTA do use the five C's as a framework in some of their sort of basic level coach education structure. And I've taken it latterly to a family intervention as well, which I can explain in a second. But it's finding its way into into tennis, mainly starting out with, with the parents to begin with.
I think that no, I think that approach of the integrating it with different pieces of the team, so to speak, whether it be parents or athletes and and coaches and to help each part of the system gain this understanding and these skills, I think is really key. I know you have um I know you have a partnership with the Lawn Tennis Association, the LTA, as you were talking about, and I know also the ITF. And I wanted to actually there was something in a handbook that we that you sent us about with the LTA in terms of just sort of a framing that I found really helpful in terms of you know essentially presenting youth tennis as this mission of almost like presenting it to players as imagine, or I guess to parents rather, imagine sort of a domed world where over this journey of youth tennis they can build sort of critical skills and tools to enable them to thrive independently as adults once they turn 18.
Mm.
And I really like the way that that was framed so that it's not all about, results and rankings and ratings and wins and losses and, you know, forehands and backhands. It's okay, are we developing skills as people so that, once these youth athletes become adults, they're equipped to handle all the different challenges that they may find in the adult world, right? Based on some of these challenges that they experienced as youth athletes and youth tennis players in particular. Wanted to see if you could just maybe expand on that idea a little bit, and also maybe talk about how that's received by parents.
Yeah, I mean the domed world exercise, it kind of forms the introductory workshop to to the five C's, and you're right, it is that concept of you're in the domed world and there's only school and tennis courts available to you. There's no other parts of you're enclosed in this world, and that's the only environments developmentally that you can benefit from. And so it's saying, how can tennis facilitate that, facilitate your child's development, because it's only tennis and education before the domed world then opens up for them and they go out into the real world and they have to survive. There, and it gets parents thinking that question around, well, what would I want tennis to be giving my child if that was the frame of it? And The words they come back with, obviously, respect, communication, fairness, resilience. That they're all words which all qualities which I know you can help develop in players on a tennis court or through tennis courts, through a tennis program. Provided you actually structure it intentionally that way and actually help players become aware that actually, we're going to help you with your forehands and backhands and your serve and your smashes, but actually we're also going to help you with becoming more aware of these psychological and social qualities, these attributes of these strengths, because you've got opportunity to develop strengths in other areas than just your forehand and your backhands, and be rewarded and recognized for them. But it has to be intentional. Parents have to talk about these concepts to say, your communication, the way in which you handled yourself, when there was that tricky line call. I'm really proud of you for the way you composed yourself, or the way you actually defended yourself or went up to the net and asked to play two, and whether are you sure about that line call? Would you play two? But then respectfully went back. The ways in which you can really genuinely encourage and recognize a kid's behaviors around that, which are obviously come as part of playing the sport, but they're not just about technical, aspects. And So I think that opportunities lie everywhere for that in tennis, everywhere. And the parents leave the workshop with, just with ideas or reinforcement ideas around, well, maybe I could even just talk about those concepts a bit more. Um, and we say, well, you might use different words in the five C's, but actually, when you really break it down, they all fit into those, kind of areas. Motive, commitment. It's your perseverance and the way in which you continue working hard on something after mistakes, and the way in which you choose a difficult task over an easy task. Really proud of you for. I know you lost the first set 7-6, and it'd be easy for you to go 7-6, 6-1, as you see with some junior kids. But actually, I'm really proud of you for where you stuck at it. And you earned that second set, and it made the third set easy, didn't it? Because you're able to praise that kind of perseverance. And of course, it requires parents to be quite knowledgeable about the game, about that, and spot those teachable moments in the same way as coaches can probably spot those teachable moments to children. But it's definitely a way in which we can build kids' strengths up um, across those different areas. And then obviously transfer those strengths into other contexts in the way in which a child might talk about some of those or show those qualities in school, in educational settings, or with their friends in social situations, or when they're doing volunteering or community work. They can replicate some of those same types of self-regulatory, kind of behavior that they've learned by being in tennis. So I think the parents have received it well. The recent intervention I'm doing with families has definitely been, well received in that respect. And yeah, I mean, I think that it's just wanting to spread the framework more, so people understand that if you have a decent structure that makes sense, and you can be intentional about it, then you can really make tennis a really fun and rewarding and enriching experience that lies well beyond the outcome of a match.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, this is really important work, Chris, but it's also it's hard because we're all situated in systems that are probably more psychologically thwarting than they are building. We did a recent episode about Robert Vallerand's work on passion, harmonious passion versus obsessive passion, and this notion of being compelled by the system to have to do things versus this sort of inner motivation, intrinsic motivation of want to. And as you mentioned earlier, in the LTA, but also in the USTA, there's levels of tournaments, there's rankings, you have whatever rating system du jour is out there for you, whether it's UTR or WTN. And these systems are not going away. We are situated in them. And at present, it doesn't appear that the governing bodies are changing anything around that to make them more, say, psychologically enriching or healthy versus not. So it almost seems like you could go to one of these workshops, be really fired up, and then you're back out in the environment and you've got all these pressures to conform to the typical, oh, you got to win this. Obviously here in the US, it's a lot about college tennis recruiting. So UTR is a huge piece of that. And it's hard to not get caught up in that. Is there a part, are you working on some of that piece to reinforce and make this more of a process rather than just sort of a training event?
Yeah, no, it's a really good reflection. And hearing you talk makes me think about, for example, how well supported football academy environments are now in the UK. Because in the UK we have a program called the EPPP, the Elite Player Performance Pathway, and it's a kind of a regulated program by the Premier League, which mandates psychological support and frameworks in academies. So you have to have a sports psychologist in there. You have to have player care and well-being. The child has to be well supported in this environment, in this professionalized, kind of space, or you don't get the higher category status or funding to the club. And so, you know, a lot of the academy football talent development environments are much more well enriched with this model. Actually, the 5Cs model is embedded in quite a number of academy football environments, and these academy environments will have probably between 1 and 3 full-time sports psychologists in the environments day to day. So they will have both part-time and full-time psychologists delivering the curriculum, working with the coaches, observing the coaches on pitch, for example, and it will be dripping off the walls in the building, and part of the individual player development plans. So the IDP plans, which are part of your goal setting, plan, do, review processes. The 5Cs is psychologically embedded in that process. So there is that system based and systematic, structured, integrated, everyone on the same page with a shared mental model understanding of that, which just translates through the spine of the organization within the football academy system. But in tennis, it's a little bit like, very, as in isolated centers, do their own thing, not very necessarily joined up at governing body level. Unfortunately, with British tennis, it isn't joined up, like that at governing body level. I do make my efforts to help here with it, but for me, I would have loved to see a holistic development program, psychosocial development program for youth tennis players from 10 to 16 years of age, for example. And I think the 5Cs would be a really great framework for that. But there could be other frameworks for that as well. It's not just my framework, but there could be other frameworks you use. But you should have a framework by which you're trying to develop children, and you're trying to onboard and educate parents, and you're trying to make kids more psychosocially literate and aware, so they've got a stronger character by the time they get to 17, 18 years of age. That. But unfortunately, it doesn't happen. I don't know why it doesn't happen, actually, because to me, it's the most simplest thing possible you could put on and be responsible for. And dare I say, I don't think it's a great example of duty of care to young people in tennis either, if I'm being perfectly brutal. So, the way I go about it is a little bit lone warrior. It's a little bit on my own. I think that the approach I've taken recently has been with my own county. So I do a lot of work with Leicestershire Tennis. So we have a county sports psychology program, which is working directly with the coaches, and then working with parents through their workshops, and then providing some accessories and support to the kids there. The work with the LTA through the competitions department, where this work happens through the competitions department, doesn't really happen through the performance department or any other department. It's more the competitions team. Has been around developing what I would say is a parent support pathway, because we all know there's a coach education and development pathway in tennis from level 1 to level 5 or whatever levels you have in the US, but there's a level of coach education and licensing, isn't there? Whereas in tennis, parents are equally as important stakeholders or caregivers as coaches are in that sense, and you really need to bring them on the journey. They need to be on the journey. And so myself and Camilla Knight published a paper called a position paper on sport parenting expertise 10 years ago. And we basically set the blueprint around how we could help to develop parents with sporting expertise or expertise in sport parenting. And it was a way of trying to encourage governing bodies to say, in the same way as you're doing coach development, you want to be doing parent development too. at the different levels and the transitions of the game as they go through. And I know Dan Gould and Larry did quite a bit of this, 10, 15, 20 years ago, looking at parental involvement at different stages of athlete development. But it's still not hasn't necessarily stuck in the context that we want parents to be educated, supported, able to cope and collaborate with coaches, and therefore we need a support system. And so with a competitions team, the emphasis has been on putting that pathway together. The competition parenting workshop is kind of is level 2. The booklet for mental and emotional skills level 3, the 5Cs level 4. There's something developing there which we're trying to persevere with. And beyond that, as you know, I've just finishing off a 5Cs family intervention program where we recruited about 25 families who wanted to take the 5Cs to the next level, and work parent-child together. So the last 6 months, I've been working with parents using online modules, accessories like the water bottles, the books, coffee cups, dampeners, stickers, all the reward little systems and accessories, where they work together with their child on taking them through the 5Cs and supporting them in match play. We've brought on board some coaches who've been interested in that as well. But it's been through the parents because they're the most intact thing I could get hold of. It wasn't about recruiting coaches to then recruit parents. It was about the parents who were interested. And then if the coach is interested, then, well, talk to the coach and reinforce this, because there's absolutely no doubt that you get more effective returns for player development when you have parent-athlete-coach relationships working together. Absolutely no doubt, but very difficult to materialize sometimes.
I think that all makes sense, and wanted to see. I know we've talked about sort of the origins of the 5Cs. Its applications in football. As Americans would say, soccer, tennis. Wanted to see a little bit about sort of the future of the 5Cs, and maybe where you see it going. Going forward. Maybe within tennis, within football. Maybe other applications. Just wanted to see, big picture, what you see as the future in terms of the 5Cs.
Well, I definitely want to encourage the framework to be available and is used as kind of as much as possible. And one of the ventures I've been doing is I've set up a kind of a social enterprise company, a training and education company, 5C psychology, for me and with a couple of colleagues, where we are trying to put on more education and events and training courses for practitioners, for coaches, and for parents. So one of the things that we're focused on doing to begin with is trying to get the practitioners to equality. So because it can't just be me going and doing it, there's only one of me, and my actual day job is a research centre director at Nottingham Trent University. So my night job is working as a practitioner psychologist in the spare time that I have. So I want to train others, essentially. So it's training practitioners who can be more knowledgeable around integrating the 5Cs in the way we've done it within tennis and in football. So they can then go and hopefully get jobs and be hired and be used by other tennis coaches, parents, organizations. We're definitely going to want to continue working with coach education and support as well. Probably have the opportunity, like we have a practitioner accreditation program, which is quite full on in the sense of online modules, two day courses, and post assessment. We'll have probably a high performance kind of coach certification for the 5Cs for those who are really into it. But we'll also have some other, seminars, webinars to try to help coaches be more familiar with the framework and come together if they really want to dip their toe, into it. And similarly with parents as well. Obviously, I continue to do kind of the education and support, sessions with with the parents, and probably down the line there'll be something maybe more sophisticated online, for parents to take. But with this particular last intervention finishing up, we already have the groundwork and the materials, for parent and child to sit down together and watch and reflect and then set little goals for strength and stretch, for their tennis, which we hope will roll out, kind of in the future. So it's just working on scaling out the 5Cs framework as best as I can, with it, and looking forward to hearing from other governing bodies and sports if they're interested in, hearing more about the framework and the application of it. I think is the simplest answer to the question. Hopefully within tennis, I've one thing that I've really benefited from or enjoyed is I actually delivered the last few years to the IMG Future Stars event in Athens. And it's an opportunity where you obviously have, I guess, some of the most talented under 12-year-old players there, but you have the parents and the coaches together in the room at the same time. And so I've really taken the opportunity to stress the importance of psychology and psychological support and lifestyle support to parents and coach together, because it's not often you get the parent and the coach together, in the same room, delivering psychology for their child. So that kind of system-based support is something I want to really try to push, where I can. But of course, I need guys like you to promote it and recognize it, and others to see the kind of simple ways in which we can really help tennis to be a game for life, and keep our kids in the game, as well as developing strategies which are performance based, because it is based around helping your tennis player be a better player, on the court, and manage themselves emotionally and socially, but it's also helping them there to try and be a better person at the end of the day.
And given that Josh and I are obviously heavily involved in tennis, we have other clients, other sports too, but anything that we can do to kind of help with that, Chris, I know we would love to stay in touch on that and help out. I've already thinking about some ideas of when we release this episode, who I want to forward it to, who's in that kind of world. You've already mentioned 5C's psychology. What are some other places that people can connect with you or look at the kinds of programs that you're offering?
Well, first of all, we have a website that obviously www.the5cs.co.uk. We're actually relaunching that soon in the next few weeks. There'll be a new website up where there'll be some information about the 5Cs on there. Anyone can contact me at that website just using info@the5cs.co.uk, there as well. I think that there's definitely opportunity if people want to go and visit the LTA website. So if you go to the LTA website in the parents area, and parent education in the LTA website, you will see some videos probably people can access, and the mental and emotional skills guide as well is free to download for anyone there, I think, who wants to read that. I think that for those individuals who are interested in reading in depth about the 5 Cs and the behaviors, albeit from a football and team sport perspective, then the best thing I can advise is buying the book, because we have a book called Coaching Psychological Skills in Youth Soccer on Amazon with myself and Rich Anderson. And that's basically a Bible, like a manual for coaches on integrating the 5 Cs in that sport. But you'll see many of the applications away from, from football. I think one other thing as well, which is worth parents and coaches looking at, although it's not tennis specific related, is we have an article collection in Frontiers for Young Minds. So there's a journal called Frontiers for Young Minds, which basically is a journal written for kids and reviewed by kids. So experts like myself, academics, put like 1,000-word articles in on a concept in very child-friendly terms, and then the kids are the reviewers of the articles. So it's really cool because you get some feedback from these little primary school kids or secondary school kids giving you feedback saying, well, maybe you could talk a little bit more about this, please, or maybe you could improve your grammar here, type of thing. It's a really excellent venture. And we edited a collection in Frontiers for Young Minds called The Psychology of Sport Performance. So if listeners Google The Psychology of Sport Performance, Frontiers for Young Minds, they will see the collection come up. And there's about 26 articles in there, which are all sport psychology based, for kids to read. And that to me is like a really great Bible for kids to understand the psychology of sports. But I think that's probably, as much as it's at regarding articles, beyond contacting me for the papers, the journal papers as well, which exist.
Well, thank you, Chris, for joining us today to talk about the 5 Cs framework. I think this has been fantastic learning experience for Josh and I and the listeners. And as I said, we'd love to continue to help your work. It's great. And again, thanks for being here today.
No, pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, Brian and Josh.
Well, that was an awesome episode with Chris Harwood. Again, thanks to Chris for joining us today. And I would say something that really stood out to me is actually the evolution of the 5 Cs, how it originally started from his work in soccer or in football, where where he was essentially delivering the 5 Cs through the coaches. And it started that way, and then really has transitioned to a framework that is, that he can deliver to different groups of people, to the coaches, to the players themselves, to parents, to combination of these groups. And what I think is really important about that is it really helps to integrate this framework into the environment more broadly, and helps so that each piece of the team is on the same page, right? That the players and the coaches and the parents are all learning the same information, all able to speak the same language, which I think is really important. It allows everybody to really be on the same page. So I think it's nice having a framework like that everybody can reference and utilize and help each other out with in that sort of team format. Brian, wanted to see if there was something in particular that stood out most to you.
Well, I think, your point is really good, Josh, helping the whole team. I think even a point that we touched on at the end was how the system that we're in, tournaments, rankings, ratings, is Not necessarily, it kind of works against the psychological needs of a lot of us. It gets us more focused on results and rankings and ratings. And using a framework like the 5 Cs can help us, I think, become more grounded in terms of, what we're truly trying to develop. And that goes for coaches and parents and players. Personally, I love using frameworks. I think they just help us plan better. They help us just to be more thorough in what we're doing. It just gives you a way to kind of look at something that's going on and look at it from different points of view. And you can just, again, be more thorough and be better about your planning. So I'm excited to see where this goes, with players, with coaches, with parents. Chris's work with the family unit sounds really interesting. I'm very interested to see how we could, in the US or in North America, use this more with some of our local, USTA sections or communities to see if there are opportunities for coaches to come on board with this, or even parents, of course. So I thought it was great to understand this and to see the evolution of the work. And now, Chris he's a tennis player, so I'm sure bringing it into tennis is quite satisfying for him. So I thought it was a really good conversation, and hopefully we'll stay in touch with Chris and see what the next steps are, the next evolution of the framework is. So that's our show for today. Again, thanks to Chris Harwood for joining us, and thank you for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for the two of us, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the content that Josh and I discuss on the show, please rate and review the podcast so other tennis enthusiasts can find it more easily. Additionally, to be notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube, and you can also check us out on Instagram. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.